Welcome to this. I'll try again.
That will be edited.
Welcome to this week's edition of the Belau Report. I'm Jane Belau, and our viewers will remember that 2 years ago and 4 years ago we talked about renewable energy. And we have with us Senator Dave Senjem, who is a part of a joint effort between the University of Minnesota and the energy people in Germany.
Yes.
And you've set up a program in Rochester, and you have Sabine from the University of Minnesota. I want you to introduce your guests, and then we'll see what's happened in the last 2 years.
All right. Well, thank you, Jane, first of all, for having us. We really appreciate this opportunity, by the way. A couple of years ago, maybe actually 4 or 5, I and several others around Minnesota got involved in a German renewable energy policy exchange program. Kind of a long name, but we've had an opportunity to travel to Germany and experience what they are experiencing relative to their energy transformation. And each year we go there and we come back and we discuss our findings, our experience, and in fact we talk about who we ought to invite back to Minnesota to be part of our discussions over here. And this year we elected, if you will, to talk to, or at least invite Mr. Gerard Reid. And he is here with us today, and he's got a funny kind of career. He's involved financially with advising companies on renewable energy investments and so on and so forth, which really, if he's going to be a good investor, good counselor, he's going to have to kind of know at least what the future holds and in terms of offering advice. So fascinating person. I've heard him twice, maybe 3 times now, and I think the viewers will find him interesting. In addition to that, Ms. Sabine Engel, Dr. Sabine Engel, actually from the University of Minnesota Institute for Environment, and she'll tell you a little bit about the program.
And she is with the Institute on the Environment?
Institute on the Environment at the University of Minnesota. Oh. We are unusual, even in the world of the University of Minnesota, a very big world, because we are present across the entire university system. We are not a department, we are an institute, and we draw our researchers and our faculty members' expertise from across the entire campus system. So we have researchers located in Rochester, we have researchers in Duluth, in Morris, and also in Crookston, and in addition to the Twin Cities campus. So what we can do is we can aggregate a lot of experts in fields on specific problems.
Okay.
It's very exciting to us to have the opportunity, as Senator Senjem just mentioned, to work together with the German government on renewable energy issues. We are the only place in the United States where this kind of regular exchange happens between people at the state level here and the federal government in Germany. And it's been incredibly interesting to see how, as Germany's energy transition progresses, the people who are involved in Minnesota's energy transition are thinking about the future. And this is why we thought it would be really terrific to bring to Minnesota one of the people who impressed the latest delegation most, Gerard Reid, whom the senator calls the futurist.
Now, Gerard Reid, you are from Germany, England, Ireland, the United States. He lives on an airplane. But you are an expert in renewable energy and as much in finance as you are in energy, right?
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it, absolutely, yes.
Okay. What's your most favorite topic?
Well, I think my most favorite topic at present is really the I call it the revolution that we're going through in the energy space. And what I mean by that is you've got a whole pile of new technologies that are impacting our energy world, and the energy world really is a conservative world. It hasn't really changed much in the last 100 years. We're still using oil and gas. Electricity is still coming from the same means as it was before. But for the first time, what we're really seeing is technology change, which is, I think is going to have a big impact on, in particular, just from where I come from, is the investor side, which is trying to help the investors navigate the changes going on in the utility space is not easy. And then the second thing is that there are other sectors that are going to be impacted by the changes going on in energy, and also trying to understand that and explain that to people is what I do. Really.
Well, you've got a great audience that's very interested. It's made up of small communities, large communities, health-oriented, and lots of farmers who are doing things like putting solar panels in the fields. And like I said, our governor has been very interested in preserving water and land around the rivers to keep the water clean. So now we come to energy, and we think of those people in Florida who are half without power right now. Is there any unusual opportunity for them to use an alternative source of a renewable energy, or is there not enough money to do that, enough will to do that, or are people most concerned about just getting their schools open and their roads open?
Well, I think what happens after a disaster like this is, I like to think is something good comes out of something bad. And the something good is that when you have a disaster like this, you have a chance to rebuild and to do things differently. And what does that mean? What that means is, if you're in these regions, the first thing that you're concerned about is energy. You're concerned about food, you're concerned about water, and then you're concerned about electricity, right? So it's bad enough when we run out of batteries for our cell phones, but when your house doesn't have electricity, or what this means is, everything is running on electricity in terms of the internet, the businesses and so on, everything comes to a standstill. So it sort of makes you think, because we all take energy for granted. People don't, nobody wants to talk about energy at a dinner party. It's a conversation stopper, in fact, but now people have to talk about it because they go, oh. So that when people begin to talk about energy, then they begin to think about, okay, so now I don't have it. I'm going to make sure I have it if something else happens in the future. And that, for me, means in particular that you look at resiliency in the system. So do I really want to rely on this power cable that is sending me power from upstate Florida, where, for that power cable to be put up again and up and running could take a few weeks? No, you don't. So what you saw after the hurricane that hit New York was people immediately said, okay, well, let's go and put in backup generation. Let's make sure if there is a disaster, I have some form of power. But I think what this means for me is actually you're going to move more and more towards what I call decentralized power solutions. It's more resilient. And this means solar, because solar can be put in your rooftop, you can put it in your garden, you can do big fields of it. And also then putting in energy storage, so batteries and stuff like that. So I think that's the big change that will happen in it. And also the other thing is you will also think about how the grid is built, because the way the grid is often built is that you're sending power down one cable over a very big distance, and if you knock that cable down, the whole system's out. Then you're going to say, well, actually, maybe we should put smaller power stations nearer to where the people live. So there's to be a rethinking, I think, in terms of energy, just because of this.
But how do you take the leadership for that kind of change? I mean, you're talking about the industry that's physically as it sits, with the large power centers transmitted over long cables and long periods of time. What is the greatest threat to the power supply in the United States? Is it a computer disruption, or is it a natural disruption like we've seen in our southern states now? What is the biggest challenge that we face?
So there's a few different challenges we face. First and foremost, we have to realize that the system we have, the power system we have in place is 100 years old. This is Thomas Edison. That's when we actually laid the foundations for this system, and it's worked great. But what we have to realize in the last 20 years, we've become totally dependent on energy, or on electricity, which means if something happens to the electricity supply, it's not like 30 years ago where, the mobile phone didn't need electricity, we didn't have them. Everything we do requires electricity. And this means that if there is a problem in the system, the economy immediately gets hit. And that means that I would say from a national security point of view, I'd be concerned about the fact that we have an old system that probably is not built for 21st century needs. And 21st century needs include things like weather disasters. It includes possible terrorist attacks, and you just mentioned it, cyber attacks. So I think that would be the first point. The second point we had to realize is we're also putting renewable energy on the system, wind and solar. This is intermittent, which means it's not there when we want it to be there. It's there when the weather decides it's there. The good news about it, it's very cheap. But integrating that into the system is not easy because the system was not built for it. The system was also built to actually provide power in one direction. And it could well be that you have solar on your roof and you're providing that power into the grid. So we have a system that's really not designed for integrating this cheap, low-cost, clean renewables into our system. And the third thing I would say is I think we will begin to electrify transport. Obviously Tesla is, Elon Musk has an incredible vision of what the future is going to look like, and I firmly believe, not just in the vision, but also that the inevitability of it, and this will also have a big impact on the power system, and again will make us even more dependent on power, and so that means we have to rethink the whole energy system really, and it's complex. It's complex.
But you make very powerful points about security and our dependence on energy, but how do you move the population to adopt multiple sources of energy?
So I would say first and foremost, there's an education that needs to start.
I know, you're here.
But when I say education, I just think of my own education up to being in university. I never learned anything about energy, right? So I didn't learn about it, and so it's still the same in schools today. So I think it starts in schools. So my first thing to do is you put solar panels on every school, right? You show people, hey, electricity comes to this. So I see this in my own home. My daughter's 6 years of age. She has an understanding for energy. Why? Because she's got a mobile device, and she realizes it runs out of batteries, and I need to plug it in, and I need to do this. She also sees solar on the roof. And for her, it's normal that electricity comes from there because all our energy comes from the sun. In her head, this is the way she looks at it. So it's natural for her. And so she's been educated with this straight away from birth. And so she's going to have a completely different idea, a view of energy going forward than my generation has. So that's the good point. And I do see it also when she looks at a coal-burning power station today. She looks and goes, wow, this is crazy. You're creating electricity with this? And as I said, that's where education starts. But I suppose part of my role in the world is to try and explain to people, not just companies and investors, but the changes going on, because they're pretty dramatic. And I realize that in the finance world, you do have a lot of expertise in and around this, because to finance any of this, you need to know a little bit about what's going on and the changes that are happening and so on. But it needs to be much broader than this, because my view is because there's so much technology change and also business model change, we can do a lot of damage to our economies by going in the wrong direction, if that makes sense. So this is why I'm here today, really.
We also need the power corporations to find out that there's money to be made in these multiple sites that produce energy, right?
Yep. Absolutely, and we're seeing that. We're seeing that very clearly. If you think of the renewables that are being built across the United States today, well, these are being built by some of the wealthiest people and wealthiest financial institutions in the country. So the money's there. That's not, for me, not an issue. I think one of the concerns would be that the power markets in particular have been heavily regulated for 100 years, and in some ways we have to let that market loose, because if you let something loose, then what happens is you get innovation. And maybe the best example is the telecoms. I mean, we would not have had the internet and the mobile phone devices if we'd have kept the telecoms market regulated in the monopoly hands. But the second you open it up, you get competition, ideas, innovation, and the rest is history. And we have to do the same in energy as well. But it's very easy for a utility to say, to a politician, he'll say very easily, oh, if you do that, it could well be that the lights go out. And that means if the lights go out, the politician's going to lose his job, right? So that's the word they use all the time. And actually, it requires a brave politician to take on a utility and say, no, we really need to change things. Or an energy company and say, let's change things. Let's relax, let's get a competition in. Let's let Google into the market. Let's let Facebook into the market. Let's let Uber into the market, BMW, right? That's for me. Amazon, well, of course, right? Okay, of course, yeah, they're everywhere, so yeah.
They have Bezos.
But the point being is that these companies want to go in and they can bring a lot of value in this space, but the regulations in the energy space prevent them doing this, right? So they've tried, Google's tried 2 or 3 times at this point in time to get into energy, and each time it's too difficult. I'm not going to do that, it's not easy, you know? But I think we need these companies in because we need fresh ideas and innovation. And by the way, if we don't do it, the Chinese will do it. And in fact, the Chinese are doing it, right? And the Chinese, in terms of the renewable energy, they're the number one producer of wind turbines, the number one producer of solar. They will be soon the number one producer of lithium-ion batteries, okay? Now, picture this. This could not have happened 40 years ago, 50 years ago. The United States would have led all these technologies, these new technologies. It's not the United States anymore, it's China. And so we need to, the only way to catch up with China, I say this, really catch up with China, is to liberalize. And that's what America does very well. Let the market decide, let innovation, let innovation out.
You would think with the emphasis on personal communication devices that people would realize that you got to charge your batteries and you've got to have power to be able to use what Google and Facebook and Amazon and all these people are selling, right? So how do you talk people to get into the source side of it, of the electricity?
Well, it's very difficult because we all take it for granted, because most people think the only thing they know about electricity is you put a plug in and the electricity comes out. They have no idea where the electricity comes from and again, I go back to the only way this can happen is to begin to educate people, right? And also educate people to realize the importance of it, because the day you don't have it is the day you have problems. So I guarantee, speak to people in Florida today and they have a different view of energy than they did 3 weeks ago. All from the fact that suddenly it's when you don't have it that you realize is an issue.
But you're talking another 25 years if you're talking about the generational, logical generational.
Yeah, but let's be clear. The infrastructure that we have in place in terms of the power grid, well, some of this is 100 years old, but most of it was built in the 1940s and 50s. So it's been around a long time. So energy infrastructure is designed to stay. So when we're talking one generation, it's not that big a time in the energy world, really. And I've seen over the last 10 years bigger changes. And maybe I use the example of solar, is that solar has gone from being a niche market technology where, 10 years ago there was probably 1 gigawatt worth of solar installed worldwide. This year it could be 90. So we've never seen a technology in the energy space that has grown as fast as solar. And people understand it, because the reason people understand it is very logical for anybody to realize, well, all the plants, all the trees, they get all their energy from the sun, so why shouldn't we, right? And so I think that's why I go back to, I think that's the real game changer for me. And it's very flexible and it's quick to install, and costs are going to continue going down. So I sort of say to people, you've no choice but to embrace these changes, because technology will win in the end of the day. Technology, good entrepreneurship, and good business models will win, and all of them are in different areas the old energy space has been up to now, you know.
First, you need the education.
Yeah.
Then you need them to be in positions of being able to implement. What about the wind energy? The windmills that we're seeing to populate the farm sites?
So first and foremost, wind, the interesting thing about wind is, okay, it's got cheap. And in some parts of the United States and the world, it is the cheapest form of electricity generation. So if something's very cheap, you're going to use it, right? So it's not going to go away. And it's going to become an important part of our energy mix right across the globe. That said, some people don't want to have them in their back garden, right? And I can understand that. And so there will be some resistance to wind going forward. But then, you know, what you'll do with wind is you might move it offshore. And you can imagine it off the coast of New York or Washington or wherever there in the Atlantic where it's not too deep. You can imagine that. But still, I'm not convinced that wind will be the center of the power system going forward. So today, the center of the power system is coal. For me, it'll be solar, and the reason it will be is because solar doesn't have the same issues like not in my backyard, and solar's cost projections in terms of reductions is much quicker, and I can also put it on my rooftop and stuff like that. And people like it, really, people like it. Most people don't like wind.
Tell our viewers about the multi-existence of the solar panels and the agricultural part of our economy.
Right.
How you can have both.
Well, yeah, so for me, I think that it's a huge, this whole move to renewables is a huge opportunity for agriculture. And in particular for, I would say, for farmers that have poor land. They might even have just small pots of poor land. It's an interesting way for them to make money. Now, of course, you can put a wind turbine on it. But actually, solar panels are much easier because you can install them quicker, and they are not an eyesore. But most importantly, you can also use the land below the solar panel. And what I mean by that is, you can, if you want to have grazing sheep there, you can put the sheep in there and let them graze on the grass. I think we talked about earlier on, if you're really into, one of the issues we have is monoculture in terms of in terms of crops, we tend to have one or two crops in an area. This is not what animals like. This is not what bees like. So suddenly you can actually create in these solar areas wildflowers. We can put bees and stuff like this. So you can, in terms of eco-diversity, you can do a whole pile of things. But most importantly for me is you are really helping these rural communities in terms of giving them jobs really, and giving them other forms of income rather than just farming.
Okay, we're at about our last 7 minutes, Sabine, and tell us what the university, you know his pitch, and you know that we need energy for security, we need energy for everything we're doing these days. Now, what's the University of Minnesota doing in terms of educating the people of Minnesota?
There's a lot of activity going on at the University of Minnesota when it comes to energy research. So we have fantastic researchers who are trying to figure out how to create more efficient solar panels, how to develop the next generation of solar panels. We have researchers who are working on how to connect the new knowledge that is being created in the labs to pilot projects in agricultural communities. So for example, the University of Minnesota has the Ag Extension Service, and part of that is to be present in all of the communities across the entire state. Close to the University of Minnesota Morris, we have our West Central Research and Outreach Center. They have a fantastic program on renewable energy. And the guy who runs it, Mike Reese, he is somebody who has a farming background and who comes to the problem with the perspective of, how feasible is this? How does it address a problem that we are trying to resolve in our community? They are thinking of ideas of how to power a tractor with wind power, how to create fertilizer out of wind power, how to perhaps clean up water through renewable energy. So there's a lot of activity going on. At the University of Minnesota in the College of Science and Engineering, we have a researcher, Dr. David Pui, who is active in piloting technology in China and Taiwan on purifying air in the cities through cleaning up the air in the cities, which requires massive amounts of energy. And he uses renewable energy in order to power those machines. So when I look at, when I listen to Gerard Reid, really what I hear is a finance person whose job it is to look at, is this feasible from a financial perspective? Is this the future where companies are going to go into? And I combine that with the imagination and sometimes the craziness, the crazy ideas of researchers or students. And the combination is fabulous because there's so much that we can do. And if I read Gerard Reid's argument correctly, we're going to see a very different world also here in Minnesota 13 years from now. It's going to be all about renewable energy. It's about the way we move. Do we have all electric cars? I thought I was still not, I wasn't sure I was going to have an electric car 13 years from now before he showed up in town. But I think I'm going to have an electric car 5 years from now.
All right. How do you connect with Mr. Senjem, who is one of the powerhouses of the Minnesota legislature, so that when he addresses the legislature, he said, look, this is part of our national security, this is part of our food project. I mean, this is one of the things we can do in the agricultural part of Minnesota. How do you get him to do that?
I think, you know, the way we do, we are all people. We don't want to be the first. We look at what our neighbors are doing. I get him to Germany to see what the Germans are doing, what is happening on the ground in specific communities. And politics, policymakers, they have the job. We give them the job to look out farther into the future and to create the environment for us to move into that direction. You know, information is key. Finding out what is done elsewhere and finding out, is this a good idea? How might this fit? That's all a university can do. And
Gerard, how would you convince David Senjem if he ought to take the leadership in the state of Minnesota?
I just say it's all about economics. That's it. It only goes back to economics. It goes back to business and economics. And the benefit of business, focusing on business and economics, is it's also good for the environment as well.
That's enough.
That's enough.
Jane, can I just interject too?
Of course, you're the one we're aiming at here.
Right. Many people, even in our community, don't realize that we get our electrical power from a coal-fired power plant in Monticello, Minnesota. That's where the power comes from that powers Rochester, Minnesota. In about 1995, when I was a member of the city council, we decided in 2030 we were going off the Monticello power plant. As we sit here today, 13 years from before the 2030 date or so, we don't have a clue how we're going to power Rochester in 2030. And we better get about thinking about that. And then I go to, you know, the nuclear plants, the XL plants. In the early 2030s, they're going to go off license, and they're probably going to get closed down. And that's literally half of the power of Minnesota. And we don't really have a clue where we're going to get that power. So it is really, really time to start talking about this. And what is going to be the mix of power? Is it the combined natural gas turbines? Is it renewable? Is it a combination of that? But we have to have that discussion, and we will. And that's a large part why I'm so interested in this. And then beyond that, I would say I think there's economic value to this. I think if if we in southeast Minnesota could be the, if you will, the renewable energy giants of our state or even the upper Midwest, I think that what comes with that then is a lot of economic value, jobs, prosperity, and things like that. So that's what we're targeting.
Okay. There's a business partnership in the state of Minnesota which is made up of the CEOs of the largest companies. And they should be the people that hear from Gerard, Reid, about the kind of talk he gives the finance people of the world, because they're the people who would be concerned about what you're talking about and motivated.
100% clear, 100% clear. And actually the finance people who are in the energy space, when they look at sort of coal and nuclear going forward, they sort of go, we won't finance it. What we want is a government subsidy. And that's pretty concerning if I'm a state that has to replace 50% of my energy capacity in 13 years' time.
Gerard Reid, thank you. Senator Dave Senjem, thank you. Sabine Engel, thank you for bringing this very informative and critical issue to our viewers. And thank you, our viewers, for being interested, because you're the people that are going to have to help change this. So we'll be with you again next week, same time, same channel. In the meantime, have a very good week. Have a very good night.